Hey everybody, welcome back to Terminus. I am the death metal guy.
And I am the black metal guy.
It has been a little while, but we have a very cool and kind of special and unfortunately timely episode for you guys today. Today we are going to be taking a look at some of the earliest work by the legendary Sacramentum. Today we're going to be covering the debut EP Finis Malorum and, of course, the debut full-length Far Away from the Sun. We had, planned in some sense to get to these at some point, probably in the relatively near future, but unfortunately, the passing of Nisse Karlén made us decide to move this up a little bit more up front than we were originally planning.
Yeah, we were actually working on an episode about another Swedish black death metal band when we heard about Nisse, and we figured it would be wrong. It just wouldn't make any sense to do that, and so we were going to do Sacramentum first. This was always on the list of bands we wanted to get to, and it seemed a fitting time, and hopefully this can stand as our small tribute to a great artist.
Yeah.
And a mighty band. And I also want to say up front that if you like this episode, if you are already a Sacramentum fan, I really recommend you check out the definitive interview with Nisse by Raphael over at Hessian Firm. This is one of their older interviews. If you look up Hessian Scrum Special, Sacramentum, Raphael talks with them for an hour and a half. I think they do a follow-up a couple of years later under the Necropolis podcast banner. But yeah, I really re-listened to it for this show. You get in addition to a great history of the band, you get a strong sense of Nisse as a person, right? As a guy who took his work extremely seriously, who has thought a lot about the links between, music and visual art, and pursuing that vision of Gesamtkunstwerk, the comprehensive artwork, through his friendship with Necrolord. You get his seriousness about occult practice, which, of course, because he's really serious about, he doesn't talk about too much. His friendship with Jon from Dissection, a sense of him as someone with who's sort of tremendous self-confidence and a sense of heroic purpose, but is also very generous in his praise to others, and his enthusiasm. And you really got the sense that he never stopped, he never quit, he never stopped listening to metal, and he never stopped finding time to be amazed by newer underground bands. So really well worth listening to that interview if you want more of a sense of him as a person.
Yeah.
With that, and I'll probably refer to it a few times in the course of this because it's a very good resource. So, without further ado, let's get to it. When the death metal guy and I were coming up, I think it's fair to say that Sacramentum was kind of a deep cut band that you wouldn't really hear about at the beginning of your black metal exploration.
Yeah, I actually... It's actually only in the past, you finally got me to listen to them maybe a little bit before we started the podcast or something.
Mm-hmm.
I had just not looked at, I was familiar with the name and Far Away from the Sun, as being a canonical record, but this is not a niche that I've ever been particularly interested in. The sort of Swedish melodic black death thing, but you were pretty insistent on it, saying that this is the one, if of the big bands that would kind of turn my head. And I listened to Far Away from the Sun, and you were completely correct on that. I find Sacramentum much more to my taste than just about anything else in the scene, at least of this level of name recognition.
Yeah, I felt, definitely triumphant when you came back, when you actually listened to it and came back.
When I came crawling back, admitting my error.
Yeah, admit it, you fucking love it, you miserable wretch.
Well, I think that the thing is, you sold it in a way that a lot of people fail to sell it. Because the problem is, Sacramentum, at least a while back, I think you were getting to this, the sort of impression of them is starting to change, especially just over the last few years in a weird way. But the problem is Sacramentum is always sold as kind of like an also-ran. It's like, oh, well, you're into Dissection, or you're into, I don't know, maybe Sentinex or something. Or you're into Dawn, or you're into the early melodic stuff by The Crown, then you'll also like Sacramentum. When in actuality, Sacramentum doesn't sound that much like any of those bands. They're kind of doing their own thing. And I have my own theories for why that is, but I don't want to step all over what you had to say, because I do want to get into the interesting way that the perception of this band has changed over time.
Well, no, yeah. Well, I mean, we'll get into our sort of genealogical theories once we get into the reviews. But yeah, this was. I mean, I knew about Dawn before I knew about Sacramentum by several years, and I don't entirely know why that is. But yeah, it was sort of buried. And when you hear, obviously, like you were saying, when you hear Far Away from the Sun, you hear something that's easily on the same level as, Storm of the Lightsbane, or whatever. And arguably, I think for both of us, we would rank Far Away from the Sun higher than Storm of the Lightsbane.
Oh, way fucking higher.
Yeah. It's a band that sort of, you could compare Sacramentum to GBK, I think, or Argoslant, in that they are bands whose time has finally come. They were bands that were always a little more on the margins that are now the rest of the scene has kind of caught up to in terms of what they're looking for musically. The big comparison that I probably made for you back in the day was, okay, look, you like highly melodic French black metal, then you need to listen to Sacramentum. Because if you like anything from the Concilium scene, your Seigneur Valence and all that, or any of the more modern sort of knightly chivalric French black metal from, the Peste Noire or Antic or any of the Antic Records or any of that, you can hear tons of that anticipated right here.
Yeah.
Well,
you can hear a ton of stuff anticipated here. What's weird is that, I mean, not to get too into the genealogy, but I guess one of the things that's so striking about this early Sacramentum stuff is that, like, it really incorporates certain melodic ideas and tendencies that wouldn't really have their time for probably another 20 years after.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, the broad strokes thing, I would characterize that is like Sacramentum were very interested in beauty, as music as about beauty, and songwriting and sort of black metal riffing as about harmony, but especially as kind of like euphonious, beautiful harmony, right? They were for the most part, they were capable of using dissonance and high tension in their melodies, but for the most part, these chords are sort of, the notes sit elegantly and satisfyingly over one another in their harmonies. Okay, wait, I think I have to buzz my girlfriend into the apartment.
Okay.
Death metal guy, take it away.
So, yeah, there is a tendency on the part of Sacramentum to write certain kinds of like highly melodic twin guitar riffs that have something to do structurally with things that had already occurred elsewhere in black and death metal, but in terms of pure melodic content, the actual phrasing that's used would not come into fashion for many, many years. And I think that's one of the most striking things to me, is like you can tell that there is a structural similarity to stuff like Dissection, but on a pure riff-by-riff basis, this doesn't really resemble anything else in 1996. It sort of like begs the question of where are these ideas coming from? And I have ideas about that, and you already probably know what a lot of them are, but it's certainly not something that it doesn't have like an inherent comparison to something immediate from the same time period. This is originary in an interesting way.
It's I mean, yeah, so the other thing I wanted to get to is the sense of detail. Now, that's more broadly characteristic of the Swedish bands. You could certainly say the same thing about Dawn and to an extent Dissection. But one thing that really separates the Swedish Black Death bands, I guess they're called, although we can get into whether that's the right label, from the Norwegian black metal bands is the Norwegian black metal bands are kind of radical, right? And they are outlining a very new approach to what is in some ways a very new approach to songwriting. And they are opening up this new origin of possibility, and doing so in a way that necessarily is pretty broad strokes, right? Like the songs are deliberately simple, and then even within that simplicity, there are riffs that are awesome because it's the first time somebody has written a riff like that, which is a very different kind of like rough-hewn, it's a very different kind of good riff from the kind of good riff that emerges from hours of thought-out top-down songwriting. Top-down is a word you used to describe Sacramentum. And then I think, in general applies very well to the Swedes. But basically, the Norwegian stuff has this big gestures, broad strokes. You're hearing certain riff forms for the first time, so necessarily you're going to hear kind of the most elemental version of those. There's a minimalism to it, and a sense of they're kind of outlining things in a way that gets filled in more later. Mm-hmm. But the crazy thing is that the Swedes, although they are responding to the Norwegians, right? Sacramentum is very clearly listening to Norwegian black metal. They're not directly imitating it in any way.
No.
And they might be my guess would be they're a few years older than the Norwegians at that point. But they're drawing on these already older and more established traditions of heavy metal and death metal songwriting, which are really more central for them riff by riff than black metal is. And they're writing with an obsessive attention to detail and riff by riff quality and filling out harmonic possibilities and, fleshing out song structures. And it's totally different from the kind of primitivist stuff you're getting out of Norway. Even when that primitivist stuff is pretty complicated, like Emperor, mm-hmm. Take the Emperor EP, which probably influenced Sacramentum, and compare it to, compare that to the first Sacramentum full length, Far Away from the Sun. It's a crazy difference. Mm-hmm. And so that kind of songwriting is now what we think of as normal songwriting.
Yes.
Right? Sort of, how do you make a good riff? You focus on detail. You might throw a lot of notes in it. You might try to do some very interesting harmonic stuff. That sort of detail-oriented songwriting is why everyone listens to Galal now.
Yeah.
That's why GBK has come of age as well. And Sacramentum was doing that. When this music barely existed, Sacramentum had a mature, top-down approach to songwriting.
Hey, it's Kari from Sepulchre Curse.
And I'm Jakob.
You're listening to Terminus.
All right, so we are, I guess one of the questions for the night, as the death metal guy has already suggested, is how do you get to Far Away from the Sun? And how do you get to something that fully formed and polished and well-rounded by 1996? And so to answer that question, we're going back to the EP from 2 years previous, Finis Malorum. There's some EPs that are basically demos. This is an EP that's basically an album. Mm-hmm. It would be, if it had one or two more tracks, it would be a full album of much rawer, but still quite sophisticated black death metal. I used to have this EP like in my MP3 collection or something because my buddy showed it to me once, and then once we were doing this episode, I was like, oh yeah, we should talk about this. But yeah, this is not something I've come back to and listened to it really with fresh ears for this. It is, I think on this EP it should be easier to hear Sacramentum's connection to both more traditional forms of death metal, especially as they had developed in Sweden already at that time, but also to pure black metal. The opposite of that. Also to traditional 80s heavy metal. And you might see that these are far more important ingredients for the Swedish black metal bands than anything else that was being called black metal at that time, especially from Norway.
Yeah, no, this is interesting because I had never heard this EP before. And I was struck by how this, at least to me, strikes me as much more decidedly black metal than Far Away from the Sun is.
Oh, okay.
At least that's how I hear it. I hear this as much more attached to kind of Emperor and Gorgoroth, and those things are more fully integrated into the Sacramentum idea by the time Far Away comes around. This is a really, really, really good EP. I think I actually like this better than Far Away from the Sun, which I think is a really excellent record. Oh yeah, no, this is phenomenally good. Like, I think what I wrote in the notes is like, Far Away from the Sun is probably the objectively better release, but I like this one more. This has a perfect juxtaposition of like kind of scrappy young band, almost demo quality, but with just such an outsized level of sophistication. It reminds me primarily of like demos from some of the bands we love. Like, this really strikes me as being an influence on the demos of Spite Extreme Wing.
Yeah, there are some turnaround, especially some of the turnarounds and like rev up riffs on this. I think on Davide at Impera and Pagan Fire, tracks 2 and 3, Travel with the Northern Winds and Davide at Impera. There's like things that really sound like how Spite Extreme Wing will do these rev up or breakdown riffs. Well,
Davide in particular is like, that's the highlight track of the EP, very clearly, and it's also the one that is like the most immediately proximal to Far Away from the Sun. I think that's the song that they isolated and were like, we really want to do more of this specifically. But there's a ton of great stuff on the other tracks as well. I remember when I was listening to this, what immediately occurred to me was like a similarity to, what's the track off the Spite demo? Is it a Renewed Thirst for Blood?
That's one of them, yeah.
Yeah, it was immediately reminding me of that one. This doesn't have the weird, austere Graveland quality that, like, the first Spite demo has. But like you said, there's something about the turnarounds and something about their particularly kind of, like, agile, liquid method of guitar playing.
Yes, really, it's the sort of bouncy... I don't think either of us sampled this part, but it's the kind of like bouncy octave leaps, the kind of fanfare riffs that bounce off from the ground and then move in the really liquid way, like boom doom 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 doom. They just do one of those, which is not a thing you hear a lot of other bands do, and which Spite Extremewing seems to lift whole cloth from this. Which is interesting, because Spite Extremewing, as far as I could tell in the interviews Argento has available in their sort of collections, he says he sort of says, I liked Norwegian, not Swedish black metal.
Which is interesting.
That's weird, and the only way I can really interpret that, I might not be remembering it perfectly. I tried to source that. I remember we talked about it in our Spite Extremewing episode, but like I tried to look for the attribution before we did this show. All I could find was him sort of criticizing certain aspects of Swedish production. But my guess would be that something like this, like Sacramentum or Dawn in the early 2000s, they might have thought of as death metal.
Because this is like so much more proximal to Spite than anything from Norway, really.
Right. Yes, for sure. And if you're in the early 2000s, like Swedish black metal, there's a thing called Swedish black metal that is much better known than Sacramentum or Dawn, which is orthodox. It's like Watain, and it's also like Dark Funeral or whatever, right? So it's kind of like more corny, sort of echoes of Dissection, while missing the point.
So the other thing that I think this is possibly a big influence on is sacramentary abolishment and later Axis. Because on this EP in particular, there is such care maintained. Well, not even care, because it wasn't really an idea at the time. It's much easier to draw a direct line from Far Away from the Sun to a lot of like modern melodic black metal stuff today. This EP, on the other hand, is in a sense, it's more varied than Far Away from the Sun. There's higher contrast. There's kind of gnarlier, more dissonant stuff in immediate proximity with the like highly melodic material. And I think that's and as well as the sort of chaotic, almost thrash style transitions, really abrupt rhythmic and tonal shifts, which are ideas that we just don't really do in this kind of melodic black metal anymore.
And the ways that the tandem guitar, when they're doing twin guitar stuff, tandem leads, the melodies often have this impossibly long, almost rambling quality to them, which, when you're doubling that with like insane thrash drumming, is really heavy, and that's certainly something Sacramentary does.
Like the aggression here and that undercurrent of like thrash rhythm section, I think is like where I'm really getting that.
This is for sure Spite Extremewing and I guess two of our favorite bands, right? SEW and Axis of Advance and Sacramentary. They're all very thrashy approaches to black metal, and one thing that might set the Swedes apart from the Norwegians is that the Swedes are okay with sounding more like thrash metal. So a couple things. Like, you could see this as the more black metal of the two for sure, because it's rawer, because there's kind of an unhinged, there is good musicianship, but it's deliberately sloppy. And the production is quite cold in a way that you don't get with Far Away. But there's another... But by 1996, Sacramentum also has had the chance to absorb more, I think, to get a clearer sense of what black metal was becoming. And something changes in the approach, which is a lot of the riffs on Far Away from the Sun are chorded. Or are two guitars playing meshing chords, or one guitar is playing chords. And even... I know you said something in the notes about, like, Sacramentum tending to break chords up.
Well, so here's the thing. I was actually trying to look for a citation for this, too. So take this with a grain of salt. But I have heard, and I want to say that it was, like, it possibly in an article from Hessian Firm or DMU or something that reported that Far Away from the Sun was recorded in a way where all of the chorded riffs were, instead of being played as chords, broken into their constituent single-string melodies and layered over one another.
And that's insane, because
so there are
no
chords being played on the record. They just make chords out of these single-string guitar tracks.
It might explain why you really can't listen to it and pin it down in terms of sliding. The Swedes are on such a higher level of musicianship and detail than everything after them that, like, you can listen to these tracks and you can tell that you can't, like, follow a single set of sliding bar chords, right? Like, it doesn't work like a Senior Voland riff or a Senko riff, Roman Senko riff. It's just like there's so much focus on, so much time is spent on the layering of the two guitar parts that you can hear it's forming sort of a chord. But how they're doing that or what's going on, who the fuck knows?
The actual sound of it changes a lot when you break it up like that.
Right. So basically, Far Away from the Sun sounds far more chorded and textured. There's a much more of an effort, like, to make sort of more of an emphasis on vertical harmony rather than horizontal line in the melodies. Finis Malorum is mostly line. It's mostly lead-driven, which to me really is death metal technique. And the production, which is cold and also kind of spindly, brings that out.
Yeah.
So in terms of influences for this, you really, like, you can hear them drawing on atmosphere, gestures, vibes from the Norwegians, but they haven't even had time to really absorb that. Gorgoroth doesn't exist. I think Gorgoroth is influenced by this stuff rather than the other way around, if anything. So a lot of the leads, they do sound like Dissection, right? You know, an interesting thing is that by 1992, Dissection is already pretty melodic, and we know that they were close with Sacramentum. You've got the Somberlane promo in March of 1992. So Dissection is an influence there, but also I think you've got to look at stuff like, At the Gates for sure, which had the early At the Gates stuff is melodic, but in this kind of strange and keening way. And it has these elaborate wandering twin guitar lines that are very lead focused. Also early Dark Tranquillity. There's a lot of more sort of exuberant riffing on Finis Malorum that sounds like Dark Tranquillity. I don't remember Nisse mentioning them in the interview. I do think the Black Death clique was a little bit different. But, like, Skydancer and all their EPs and demos had already been out for quite a while by the time this came out. Yeah, to me it sounds like the basic raw materials here are very death metal and very traditional heavy metal, but they're reaching towards how do we do something that's broadly parallel to the Norwegians without having almost any of the same constituent parts. Heavy metal wise, there's a lot I guess we can get into that more with the samples. Do you want to do your first sample?
Yeah, sure. Let's listen to some tunes. Let's listen to some tasty licks, as a middle-aged guitarist would say. So we've just got a couple samples for this one. I mean, this is like a sub 20-minute record, so we don't want to play the whole thing. We got to leave some sort of excitement for the listeners out there. So I have sampled a chunk off of the opening track, Moonfog. This is really good. Black Metal Guy got the centerpiece track.
I did.
Which you'll hear. But here, let's just listen to this, and I'll talk a little bit more about like high-level ideas of like where this slots in 1994 and what kind of band Sacramentum really is at its core. Okay, so a lot of cool stuff's happening there, but I sort of want to take the 30,000 foot view of that. That's a lot of cool riffs, one right after another. And we are inclined to immediately think of them as like black metal riffs. What black metal band sounded like that in 1994? My argument is basically none. And that Sacramentum is, like, really at its heart a melodeath band before they are a black metal band. They have, like, a spiritual connection to black metal. Clearly they, like, identify with it in a big way. And nowadays, there's a lot of black metal bands that use riffs like that. But I would say the origin of all this stuff, of, like, probably 80% of what's being played by Sacramentum, is coming from melodeath. You know? It's pretty rare that there is, by 94 or 96 standards, a straight-up black metal riff getting played. But where would you hear riffs like these? All over early Dark Tranquillity, early In Flames, Eucharist, stuff like that. I think that while there's an aesthetic relationship to black metal, I think in terms of like nuts and bolts songwriting, this has way more to do with the Gothenburg scene.
Yeah, I think, and indeed, they were from Gothenburg.
Oh, they were? I didn't even realize they were actually from Gothenburg.
Yeah, so that'll do it. I think I agree with you, except with a change of emphasis. I just think this is like it's a different approach to do, like, black metal, I think, to me, is not about a specific set of musical techniques. It's more like it's more of an ideological idea. If grindcore isn't about a specific kind of riffing, it's about a way of writing songs. I think black metal is more of a, extreme metal played with a particular kind of ideological charge, manifest in a certain kind of atmosphere.
That's fair.
Yeah, sort of religious, extreme metal with a religious a religious dimension to it, basically. This is basically like it's an alternate version of what black metal is that sits basically almost exactly at the same time as the Norwegians. But I do agree with you that, like, almost all of the almost all the raw material here is death metal or something else. Yeah. I mean, arguably, we've talked about this, like, arguably melodeath is not death metal. It's very hard to listen to Skydancer and say this is a death metal record.
No, I'm definitely one of those. I'm one of those old school guys that considers melodeath like a kind of extreme heavy metal and not actually death metal. But the term of art is fine,
Yeah. So that's it's I mean, like, if, like, in terms of, like, the early Dissection, pre-full length Dissection actually sounds more death metal than Dark Tranquillity or whatever. Mm. But yeah, it's like, where black metal kind of had, the Norwegians kind of had this, it was deliberately reactionary. It was reactionary to do something new. It was clearing away all of the music by their immediate predecessors to go back to the very origins of extreme metal in the 80s. These other guys are not doing that at all. They're saying, oh, black metal is a direction this music is moving in. And they're hearing they're just integrating, instead of being like, okay, well, we all need to be Euronymous bands now. They all instead they are like, well, what we're interested in is obviously playing music like the bands we admired as teenagers, right? So obviously we're still gonna sound like Merciful Fate and Metallica and Creator and Iron Maiden and all of that, but we're also going to be highly atmospheric and have a lot of blast beats. And
I guess my argument, which is more of an academic question, because I don't really have a dog in the fight either way, is that, like, when I listen to this, I think about, like, how everything else going on in black metal in 94, or nearly everything, is about stepping away from big guitar flourishes, deliberately reducing technicality. The only guys operating at this time who have a similar level of technical sophistication are Emperor, and actually most of Nightside is, like, not as technical as a lot of the stuff on this EP, or Immortal, who are, Immortal are a secret death thrash band wearing corpse paint, so I guess that's my kind of curious angle on this whole thing is, like, sure, like, there's sort of comparable ideas and you can tell the aesthetic connection, but in 1994, this seems utterly divorced from, like, everything in black metal, if you really break it down.
It's certainly more technical than, like, the most black metal Emperor songs. It's, But it is where black metal went after this. Yeah. And so I think that's the point, is that they're, I don't know, they're just getting where it was going very early.
Well, it's sort of, it kind of brings to mind, I failed to respond to it, but, somebody, when we did that episode on Sargai, somebody dropped that anecdote about an old interview with Shoutrog, talking about when he was starting Sargeist, he said, I'm going to do another band which will be an Iron Maiden style 2-guitar band. Which is a fascinating way to think about Sargeist and kind of puts you in the headspace of where some of the guys from this era see these musical boundaries falling. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And speaking of Iron Maiden, we should go to my next sample.
Yeah, sure.
So one of the, or I guess as a way of introducing that sample, right? There is, despite this being a really good EP, there's still just an immense difference in accomplishment between this and the next record and the first full length. And if there's a problem on this EP, it's that the band's technicality outstrips their capacity for writing individual memorable riffs. Mm-hmm. They are very good at riffing, but they are not, for the most part, staking it all on a carefully selected set of riffs. The Norwegians, in fact, do that more because it's so minimalist and it's less technical. So these songs, they tend to sort of devolve into these kind of like endless thrash workouts. But that's kind of, like we were saying about sacramentary abolishment and stuff, that's kind of cool.
Yeah, that's right? kind of the meat of sacramentary is the endless thrash workout stuff.
And so in this band too, it's in Sacramentum as well on this EP. It does. They're so good at the riffing process that these endless thrash workouts tend to be enjoyable in themselves, right? It becomes kind of its own aesthetic quality, right? The fact that it's hard to follow and that it's not, conventionally speaking, going anywhere becomes cool, right? Yeah. You just want to hear like the next little change up. You can, and in parts like that, you can really hear a connection to stuff like Skydance, like Dark Tranquility, where they have these sort of like flying spaghetti monster guitar lines that are just like, right? And it's just like if you stretch that out and turned it into a very long sort of mid-tempo sequence, you'd hear that. But like, so that basically like when this doesn't work on this album, it can become a bit of a drag. But for the most part, it works. On Divide et Impera, which the death metal guy mentioned is kind of the central track, this is where the endless thrash workout approach really comes into its own and pays off. And this is just awesome. You're all going to love it.
It's so good. It's just so obviously the song.
Yeah. And all that is just like huge riff after huge riff with the only thing connecting them being like ambition.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I do like about this record, and Far Away from the Sun also, is that I think that Sacramentum can be sort of flattened out into like, oh, they're like a melodic Black Death band and they've got these super epic riffs, which is like true, but the songs are not organized around a single riff. They're more
they really aren't. We should talk about that more for the next one.
Yeah, they're intricate networks of riffs, and none of them really have clear dominion over the others.
Yes, and I guess you're right. That is the thing that connects the kind of riffola approach on this EP to Far Away from the Sun, right? Far Away from the Sun is much more rigorously structured, but it also doesn't actually put all the weight on individual riffs.
Yeah.
And in that sense, it's more sophisticated than the Galal school, I would say.
Well, yeah, that's what relates it more to Axis and Sacramentary.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's these are songs that they end up producing songs that have very memorable individual riffs on them, but then you go back and you realize that riff was really just a part at the beginning of the song that never repeated.
Yeah,
right?
Or it was a bridge or something, yeah.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So certainly, yes, they are not... You're right. There's an artfulness to the way they refuse to rest in a handful of looping ideas. These are not punk song structures, right? Mm-hmm. There was that. So at the end, you get this flourishing do 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 do. You can hear how that all relates to like your Eucharists and your At the Gateses and in Dark Tranquility and all that. But again, that stuff too, even though we're citing it as an influence here, it barely existed at this time as well, right? This is really happening simultaneously in the same sort of general scene. It also, of course, sounds like epic doom metal. And you could hear a kind of doominess to a lot of those long melodies throughout this EP that you could also hear on the Sacramentary Abolishment EP.
Yeah, compressed Candlemass.
Yeah, sort of like stately, unfolding lead melodies. There was that crazy blast riff not long before the end of the sample where you had one guitar. This is again a thing that they will continue on Far Away, is having very independent guitar lines. But one guy is sort of locked into a melodeath arpeggio riff. And the other one is just doing this soaring, runaway, upward-reaching trem riff over it. And they sort of mesh but conflict in a really neat way. And then back to the beginning of the sample, which is obviously kind of like the ha-ha-ha-ha awesome heavy metal moment. That, as we were both talking about, is Iron Maiden, and not just any kind of Iron Maiden, but this is important, like later Iron Maiden, or like almost Maiden after they were a new wave of British heavy metal band. So like the thing death metal guy, you've always told me I need to go listen to metal, Maiden after Power Slave or whatever. And because of this review,
Iron Maiden was never irrelevant. That's the thing.
Yes.
It's like it's easy to boil them down into like a handful of records, but it's like if you actually look at what are the best records through Maiden's career, fuck man, pick. There's like 10 of them.
Yeah. Yeah, so I've learned that lesson now, and I've been, and I'm realizing that like a lot of the, right, that sort of, that Maiden strut riff at the beginning, that's not like a riff off Peace of Mind or Number of the Beast. That's like a thing they would do on, that's like The Evil That Men Do.
Yeah.
or something on Seventh Son of a Seventh Son, which is an awesome record. It might be one of my favorites. And it's also like a lot of these melodeath riffs where everyone can clearly hear, okay, that's a Gothenburg style melodeath riff, where you have this kind of pedal point thrash, but moving pedal point pattern moving up in this stepwise way, you know, down, 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 you know, that's like there are those on Seventh Son, and there are also those on Fear of the Dark, and those are not on Old Maiden. It's like in later Maiden, it's like the guitarist starts deliberately getting a little more formulaic, but like in a cool way. Like you know, the Trooper riff, you can't, like, as a young guitarist, you can't just write your own riff to the Trooper. That requires kind of like freestanding melodic ideas, right? Whereas you can, when the Maiden guys start doing these more kind of like looping pattern riffs, then that starts to become something you can like riff on and develop. But it really shows that, like, for these guys, like, Iron Maiden was not a thing in the past. Iron Maiden was a band that they saw with their cool uncle at the stadium last year.
Yeah, Iron Maiden is alive, and it's particularly difficult to imagine now at this point, where the memory of Maiden is so calcified in all of our minds. Maiden as a band to listen to seriously, not just to, like, drink beer and throw the horns with your buddies, but like albums to listen to, like albums alongside all your extreme metal stuff. You know, it sounds silly to say, but it's like it's so difficult to listen to a Maiden album or a Sabbath album or something divorced from its cultural weight. But that's kind of what these guys are able to do. Yeah,
and they're you know, yeah, to them it was still serious. Like, yeah, man, like, maybe it's not like death metal, but it's like, it's metal. Of course it's extreme. There was basically, they took Maiden so seriously that they were listening to and responding to them right up through, like, 1992. Right? Just all of that was going... it was coming off of Fear of the Dark and immediately going into Swedish death metal.
Yeah.
There was not a sense of, like, vintage Maiden as this thing to be fetishized. And,
yeah.
You know, I think slowly there's, among the more, in the leading edge of the scene, I think we're slowly starting to decide that sort of trad metal revival people are some of the most cringe on the scene. And they are very, they're very responsible for that kind of like Flanderized heavy metal fun time beer dance Iron Maiden thing.
Yeah.
You know? So yeah, lot of later Maiden here. And, you know, you've said before that maybe the Swedish Black Death sound is really just the extreme metal version of heavy metal. I think, like, basically, I think what we can agree about at this point is that any name for it would be better than black/death metal. And we are back to discuss Sacramentum's masterpiece and calling card record, The Emanations from the Black Castle. This is Far Away from the Sun. This is, what can I say? The cover art is obviously by Necrolord. In his interview with Hessian Firm, Nisse talks about how central his collaboration and friendship with Necrolord was to his vision for the record. For him, having a visual, like almost a sense of the album as a place and as having sort of settings connected to it is very important. And we all know that even though, Emperor has... Nightside is also, that's also Necrolord, right? Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's,
Well, this is, like, immediately comparable to Nightside.
It's immediately comparable, and I think even though the Nightside cover is great, I think we can all agree that Sacramentum, in fact, got the ultimate Necrolord cover.
The ultimate Necrolord cover is, Nightside without the goofy goblin guys in the corner.
Dude, okay, come on. I love the goofy goblin guys.
Oh, come on, man.
They're gonna invade, man. Or they're just getting back from their raid. I guess they're returning to their castle. But I see what you mean. I just think that, Sacramentum's has a purity to it.
Yeah. There's probably a goofy academic argument you can make about, like, setting black metal bands versus character black metal bands for their covers. You know?
Yeah, Satanic War Master is a character black metal band.
Dark Throne is a character band.
Oh my god.
Burzum is a setting band. It's yeah.
Yeah, I see what you mean. That's actually a pretty good point. But yeah, so this one has certainly a legendary cover. And it also was released with, I guess, what you could call the ultimate classic lineup of Sacramentum. Nisse has talked about how his sort of the fundamental core of the band is his collaboration with guitarist Anders Brolik. And it's a very it's a very comprehensive collaboration. Nisse apparently has actually always contributed some of the riffing. Right, he'll come to Anders with ideas for for the bones of riffs, even on guitar, right, and then also fill it in on bass.
The credits, just on Metal Archives, kind of look like everyone was involved in everything.
Exactly right. So yeah, Nisse is credited as vocalist and bassist, but and lyrics, but he was also helping with the guitar and just the overall vision for everything. But so to that core duo on this record is also added another heavy hitter who was not on the EP, which is Nicklas Rudolfsson, who is also the drummer of Runemagick and a number of other excellent projects we've reviewed on this show, such as Funeral Orchestra. So Nicklas is a guy who has his own creative vision and his own projects, but for this, he was an integral member of Sacramentum on their sort of pivotal work.
Yeah. It's interesting how he's the drummer on Far Away from the Sun, but you don't, like... His position in the band is kind of weird. It was like almost sessiony in a way, but he's also considered kind of a full member. I don't know. It's unique.
And he also gets songwriting credits, basically. Yeah. So this is a very powerful lineup that produced this work. And there's, I think, just on the whole, like, obviously, we can all appreciate Burzum, but not everyone can be Burzum. And there really is something to be said for full bands that coalesce around authentic collaborations. If you can respect your bandmates enough to enjoy spending time with them and try to actually exchange ideas, you can come up with something that is more than the sum of the parts, and that is absolutely what Sacramentum have done here. Yeah,
but and yet despite that, this has the kind of clarity of vision and rigor of sort of an auteur band also.
Yeah, I think it's because they're really good friends, and because in some sense the lineup is just two guys.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're clearly on like exactly the same wavelength.
Yes, and they spend a lot of time talking through how these parts are going to relate to one another, which is something people these days just don't want to bother with.
Yeah.
But back in the day, it seems like for these guys back in the day, a whole part of the creative process to produce music this intricate was like, hey man, you want to come over and like hang out?
Yeah,
Everybody's like, yeah, sure, I'll get a 6-pack. And then you come over and, you know, maybe you like listen to a Merciful Fate song or something and you start messing around with your guitars. And you'd be like, okay, so that the third riff in that sequence, yeah, can you do a better harmony there?
Yeah.
And like that's a huge part of the song. And that's not work that's hanging out with your bro.
Yeah.
It's and you know, that is definitely something that the internet age has lost. So, what else defines this? In terms of, as a level, we've already talked a bit about some of its defining characteristics. In terms of what elevates this beyond the EP, it's just a completely fleshed out and integrated version of the same initial vision. You can hear here that at this point in some ways it sounds less like black metal. As the death metal guy pointed out, the earlier one is rawer, more ripping, colder in tone, a little more unhinged. This is a very hinged record for the most part.
This is very controlled and stately.
Yes, it's majestic. It's even when it's fast, it's rarely frantic. It's rarely rabid. It can pull that out in moments, which is important. But yes, this moves even when it's, for the most part, even the blasting has a grandeur to it. And there is space for everything to develop. The sort of riffola approach to songwriting on the EP has been refined into genuine through-composed tracks. This is, we'll get into that more, but these tracks are far less, as we've already talked about, these tracks are far less focused on the individual riff than you might think, despite the fact that they all have like one really memorable riff at the center of them.
Well, yeah, that was something that interested me listening, because it had been probably a couple years since I'd listened to this last, and this had far fewer giant, obvious standout riffs than I remembered, but also just a far higher average quality than almost anything else out there. And I think there's an effort made for these to be kind of horizontal, sprawling songs. You know, I think they want to allow these songs to have the opportunity to develop multiple sets of peaks and valleys. And I think it's very interesting in that regard. You know, and that's one of the things that makes this a unique record is the sort of deliberate rigor, you know, the sort of like flat, monotonous in a good way black metal quality of the songwriting. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, finding a lot of room for variation and contrast and to constantly kind of up the ante and tension over the course of these songs.
Yeah, so we could perhaps lead off with that. Why don't we do that? We were gonna go through the tracks in order, but okay, so my favorite song on this record has got to be Blood Shall Be Spilled.
Mm-hmm. That's one of the ones I was considering sampling.
Yeah, dude, this is a banger. In some ways, this is a very traditionalist black metal track, especially coming out in 1996. It's a song that basically puts the chorus up front, and as almost the main riff is the chorus. More than any other track on this record, it has kind of an 80s feel. And you'll hear that there's a kind of, it sounds like the first Niflheim record. There's sort of primitive half-blasting, there's, you know, aggressive satanic lyrics, Nisse does a fantastic performance. In the interview with Raphael, he talks about how he kind of thinks of this song as an explosion. So this is kind of the most like hell yeah devil horns track on the album, but it's also very sophisticated. So we're gonna start with we're gonna start a bit into the song on like the second or third run of the chorus. This is Blood Shall Be Spilled. How the hell did we get there?
Yeah, I love the I love how ornate and how narrative it is. I would also like to say, again, take me with a grain of salt, but I'm really convinced just by listening to it, that idea of everything being recorded single string. Like, there is something about the guitar tone on this where I feel like that's audible. The chords do not sound like chords in the way you typically hear them on a metal record. It's very interesting.
I guess the place it sounds most chorded here would be right under the chorus, or like in the pre-chorus and under the chorus, where it's da, 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 which is this, very powerful folkish melody that you can hear just in, a Seigneur Valland track or a Satanic War Master track or whatever.
Yeah.
Anything from much later. But you have that sort of very powerful melody. You think it sounds like even there, it's not really being chorded.
No, I think that it's like actually not played with chords. Like there's something about I think that it also has to do with
could it just be? I guess that could just be tandem. That could just be two notes.
I think everything's tandem because I'm noticing there is this strange streaming trem quality to everything. It just doesn't feel like you're hearing chords get changed around and fingered in the way that you typically would. Mr. Wilkins is very excited about this.
Yeah, I mean, that was a sick riff, Wilkins. What can I say?
Yeah. So
I hear what you mean. The playing is very like energized.
Yeah, well, it's also one thing that I think is interesting. Again, there's so many instances of these guys doing stuff that wouldn't pop up again until many years later. That sort of chiming, steady eighth note strum riff, that that's a thoroughly modern idea. That's like something you would hear in like a modern post-black record. Like that could have been on the Hauntologist record or something.
I mean, it sounds almost note for note like AFI ripped that off in some of their stuff from the early 2000s.
Yeah, I was about to say there's weird stuff that sounds like modern emo influenced black metal, but way back here, which means that they had to have been getting it like just from Maiden,
Yeah, it's very. I can't think of another band from 1996 that was just like, yeah, let's open up the song like that and just let the guitars chime.
Yeah, that's highly unusual.
Yeah, it's 96. Like Maiden, but it's also like post-punk and or like Mogwai or something.
Yeah, which is weird because I feel like this is a band where I think we can safely say they're not drawing influence from punk. Or
no, I don't. I know there's like zero punk influence.
Yeah, I get the sense that these guys listen to 99% metal and like 1% like Swedish drinking songs,
Right. Yeah. The Swedish drinking songs YouTube full album. With like obviously there's some misspellings in there. Yeah, so it's really good, and there's just an astonishing transformation that occurs over the course of the song. It does, you've always said that you really like songwriting to be narrative, to tell a story.
Yeah, I always want to end in a different place from where I started.
And I've tried to push back on that a little bit. I'm like, well, a good cut song can also be like an action or a process or something, a little more abstract. But like at the same time, and that's more of a black metal or hardcore kind of way of songwriting. But like Sacramentum really are writing songs in this narrative tradition that is death metal and is heavy metal.
Yeah.
And this is it's an example of that done extraordinarily well in a way that is just really cool. They're not sacrificing atmosphere or consistency to do it. It reminds me of this like bit in, Ezra Pound talks about metamorphosis as a central quality of poetry, which, and he talks about how, the transfer of energy, right? The sort of transfer of force always is tied into a change of form. And that can sound a little obscure, and you can kind of think of examples where it's like, well, it doesn't I guess a lightning bolt does transform the form of a tree, although that's not the most, that's not the first, it's not the first kind of language I would use for that, right? But, it basically can sound a little obscure, but when there really is something to it, and both as kind of a metaphysical proposition and as something about art. And on a track like this, you really hear it, that what Sacramentum is never interested in letting the song sit still. There has to be a metamorphosis. And what's really, when it's really sort of the peak energy is when it crosses that bridge in the middle of the song. Like, it wouldn't be... You could make a full song out of the first 3 minutes of this song, and it would be an excellent Impaled Nazarene track.
Yeah.
Right? It would be like Impaled Nazarene with leveled up guitar work.
Yeah, but these guys are very invested in scope. That is, like, essential to the band.
Yeah, and it's essential. I mean, we talk about a full spectrum idea of this music. Here it is in 96. They're like, yes, in the first half we want to have glorious harmonized melodic riffs, but have the energy sound like fucking Creator and Sodom. And then we also want to show you that that's the same thing as all of this flowing, dance-like nocturnal music that flows out of the end of the song. It's the whole point is that these are the same song.
This is unusual for us to approve of, but this is very consciously smart music. You know, this isn't guys like accidentally stumbling across genius. The everything here feels very like rigorously composed and thought out from top down.
Yeah, that's the thing about the Swedish bands. They are sort of mature beyond their years when they're writing this stuff, in the best sense. And so, yeah, this is just a really impressive effort at, like, one song that you think is that another band would have made two completely different songs out of. And all the action really is in that place where the song sort of dissolves and coalesces again with those chiming single notes rather. Yeah, it's just it's phenomenally beautiful. And you know, I didn't really realize when I went back to this song for went back to this album, you almost like the placeholder in my head for Blood Shall Be Spilled just is the first 3 minutes.
Yeah, and you forget about the back half.
It's crazy to me that it's also that, because that other part, the back half of the song, is one of the most memorable parts on the album. Mm-hmm. These are the same song.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. How about you do one?
Sure. So, in that case, let me go to my first sample. This is actually my favorite track on the record. Cries from a Restless Soul. I don't have a great reason for why this is my favorite. Something about this one just seems like particularly emotionally affecting. And I'm going to play some of this, and then I'll talk about some more stuff that I think that this band might have been a tremendous influence on, that has me kind of rethinking one of my favorite bands.
Does sound like a chord in the background.
Possibly. I don't know.
This turnaround is so cool.
Well, we're done with the sample now, so... All right. So I think I like it because this is the DSBM song. You know. This is just phenomenal. That opening riff is fucking huge. Love the way they bring it back. I love the sort of like frantic pointillistic lead riffing that you get in the middle of that sample. Love the big drum drop out on the second riff, which is so modern. There's so many like things from 20 years later happening on this song and really across the album as a whole. So
the drum drop out, you're talking about the...
Yeah, where he drops from the blast beat to just like the... Yeah, to just the rock beat under that same trem riff. Mm-hmm. Very like modern, like black metalcore kind of thing to do. It's like a Winterfilla thing. It's awesome. Mm-hmm. So a couple things I want to bring out. One that I completely forgot to mention is like the closest comparison I can make from this record to another from around the same time is actually my favorite record from this like Swedish melodic Black Death style, which is Vinterland's Enter My Last Chapter. Mm-hmm. Which is like I'm kind of surprised that like I forgot to bring that up originally, but that just seems to be the immediate brother to this record. And Vinterland was like, I feel like I heard them for the first time, like, around the beginning of the podcast. You got me to listen to that when I was like, oh, this is it. This is the shit, man. So that's another record that sounds, like, so ahead of its time, and it's released the same year as this one, which is really interesting. Another thing that I'm detecting, listening to this a lot, as well as another band that we'll be covering soon, is... This strikes me that this band might have been a tremendous, like, first-string influence on Take. It's got the, you know, the thing... What's interesting is, like, Far Away from the Sun, like, despite the title and the album art and the lyrics, this doesn't strike me as a very dark record. This is more kind of triumphant and adventuring.
That's kind of where I was actually going to go. It's certainly not... I think the band would insist that it is dark... But it's definitely not evil.
Yeah, it's like dark, but it's like majestic night sky dark, not like demons prowling trying to eat you. You know?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's one of its, you know, to your point about this being in Terminus tradition, I will argue your point, which is that if you really wanted to emphasize how not black metal this is, at this point in history, the black metal sound was associated with sounding evil pretty directly. And you can hear that in all of the Norwegian bands. The difference is that maybe your Emperor or your Gorgoroth sounds evil but also noble. Mm-hmm. And the Sacramentum and the other Swedish bands, Dawn certainly, Vinterland, just sound noble.
Yes.
And that is by far the central aspect of the music. It's warlike, it's sort of aggressive, but it really does not. There's not this sort of there's not the traditional sort of satanic sense of disharmony in the way the songs are written. It's not dissonance driven. It's not about sort of There's no shade of nihilism or even of sort of rebellion per se. This just is what it is, which is powerful and authoritative and, as you say, adventurous.
Yes, yeah, and that's the big thing that ties this with Take to me. Take is, I mean, I've mentioned it enough on the show. It's one of my favorite black metal bands of all time, specifically like the first three records. And this has a lot in common with that. The higher than normal technical ability, the more ambitious stuff going on drums, and the high contrast sort of thrash technique to like bridge disparate parts. There's a lot of similarity there. And it's also interesting because Take is a band that I have to constantly remind myself is Norwegian, because I always think of it as a Swedish band for some reason. But I'm starting to think that Take was far more influenced by Sacramentum and bands from this scene than really anything in Norwegian black metal proper.
That makes sense to me, man. I remember when I finally really started listening to the old Toke records, it definitely sounds more like these Swedish bands. And it's possible also that I've read interviews with, say, certain French bands where they say, oh, we were never that into the Swedish stuff, we like Norwegian black metal. But then what is Norwegian black metal to them? And it's like, it's Toke.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Toke is like the least Norwegian sounding Norwegian black metal band.
And from at that same sort of like point of the hinge between the 90s scene and the modern scene, something like Hirolorn probably also sounds more Swedish. It's Toke, I don't know, I associate them because I had a friend who was really into Toke and Hirolorn. But that's
you're talking to him right now.
Okay, no, that's true. You are one of them, but there's the other guy too. But Hirolorn probably also is very Swedish indebted. But yeah, no, it makes sense to me. The other thing that you could say that this track in particular has, even though it's called "Cries from a Restless Soul," I mean, the soul is restless, but not in the way you'd expect. Like, it's not like moping around over its grave. It's sort of like doing somersaults on the night wind. And like, whipping itself around castle towers. And it's Sonic the Hedgehogging. Like, this soul is hyperactive. And it's very exuberant, joyous music. That doesn't conflict with the sense that it's solemn, but this is the sense of all extreme metal is sort of joyous in one way or another. You know, for the Norwegians, that's certainly present in all sorts of ways, whether it's sort of like rabid battle joy or sort of cackling blasphemy or whatever. But like, this track has a lofty this band, and this track especially, is exuberant. And pound for pound, this has to be the best track on the record, I think. Just the way each of these melodies answers the one before it in a way that is far more than the sum of its parts, but also individually is just a killer riff.
Oh yeah, it's dizzying. It starts off at, and it's doing a difficult thing. Another point of comparison that I would make, to upset what old heads remain, is there's something about the songwriting on this record that is extremely similar to the way Cradle of Filth would write their songs around this same era. Because this is the same year as Dusk and Her Embrace, I believe. 96. But the way that Sacramentum will kind of start these songs in media res, like huge opening riff, sort of the chorus riff, and then pulling back to the statelier, sort of more relaxed thing before amping up the tension again. Sort of putting the intro second. That's something that Cradle would do constantly in this era. Yeah.
The tension release of that initial two riff set is just awesome. The da 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 da.
Yeah.
That kind of like clip sort of da da, like those are like sort of clearly defined quarter notes in this kind of like rolling in this sort of Baroque style where there's just this sort of uniformity to it, right? It's very similar to the Krieg riff that Gorgoroth would do a year later. But Gorgoroth had also already done some riffs like that. It has that Baroque aspect to it. And then the next line in this song is just right? It just suddenly soars. They go from this Baroque discipline to just romantic freedom and expansion. with that like single soaring line, and it's really beautiful. And like, it's crazy that there was that level of sophistication happening back then, and that much thought and heart put in the connections between these parts.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, yeah. Anyway, I guess we've got some other samples.
Yeah. Do it to us. Come on.
All right, yeah. So obviously, we gotta listen to. I tried to not do the obvious part, but then I'm like, we gotta do the obvious part. So this is Far Away from the Sun. Beginning of the track.
Man, a lot of shit happens in these songs.
Yeah, it's crazy. So structurally, again, you can see this emphasis on metamorphosis, which is, you get that dum-dum-dum-dum-dum riff at the beginning with that melody uncoiling over it, sort of descending over it. That's the big riff. The big riff is really the interaction between those two guitar lines. And it never repeats. Even in this 2-minute initial section, it doesn't repeat. All you get after that is a set of variations on those two melodies that just ricochet off one another. That sort of stutter blast beat about 2/3 of the way through the sample is insane.
There's actually, all over this place, there's lots of unusual but very effective drumming decisions. Which I think is influenced by Trim from Emperor specifically.
Oh, maybe. And originally from Enslaved.
Yeah. Enslaved also.
Yeah. Well, Trim was originally in Enslaved.
Oh, I always forget about that. Yeah.
Yes. It was one of those things where it's basically he was kind of, they did that EP to get that split together and it just kind of jumped bands. But, basically, the drumming is really good, and it's it's like Nicklas kind of almost intentionally loses the beat and then catches up by doing this Graveland gallop in quadruple time. And, they work it through enough of these variations that by the very end of the sample, they're justified in suddenly making this big tonal shift, which is right where we cut the sample.
Yeah, and it works really well. That high contrast stuff is kind of what this record is made of, and one of the things that makes it so exciting to listen to.
It's like it takes them 2 minutes just to explore the implications of the opening riff. Honestly, like, it's not, I mean, this is definitely not, this is written top down in a way that's very not jazzy, but there's something kind of jazzy about the way they're like, okay, those two melodies, all right, we've got to go. I mean, I guess that's also how symphony works, really, right? You have your initial statement, and then you work it out over the course of a movement. But it's a very non-heavy metal, non-rock way of songwriting.
Yeah. Okay, so let me do my last one real quick. Okay. This is from toward the end of the record. This is Beyond All Horizons. I really like this one too. Here's another case where I just want to listen to it and talk about some other places that this record would end up influencing a little bit later. So we actually conclude there with some of the more straightforward, like grim black metal stuff on the record. But the first handful of riffs in that sample are going to influence Say the Line, Bart.
1 cent from the Golden Hall.
Yeah, he said it. Yes, I think that it's like pretty clear that Amon Amarth must have been pulling some ideas pretty much directly from this record. Specific things about like the way they shape melodies, the drumming ideas, like that little syncopated like switch halfway through the riff in there is very much like a Friends of the Sun Cross kind of thing.
It's just really that entire first 3 riff sequence. There's just the sort of big, manly, isolated trem riff played on the low strings. Mm-hmm. That just sort of the big trem riff that leads the sample it is just is just incredible, and that just sounds like Amon Amarth, and yeah, that whole second, the sort of mid-tempo marchy thing you're saying, that's the part with like the cymbal stutter, right?
Yeah.
The and yeah, the harmonies are all really like Friends of the Sun Cross, which is the best Amon Amarth song. and certainly their most ahead of its time song.
Extremely, yeah.
And then the third riff after that, the like do 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 do, just the way the call and response, but the way these riffs just answer each other is astonishing, and you really just don't hear anything this lively or complete until you get like the Italians and the French, right?
Yeah, this is not something you hear in Scandinavia.
No, it's and until you get just sort of much more modern forms of black metal songwriting, it's it's and the sense that also like this is one of their more burly tracks. And yet they still work in those really sort of elegant gliding riffs. Yeah, we were both talking about the evil section in the middle. That's one of the few evil parts on this album. Mm-hmm. And somehow then they get back to all the glorious stuff. Couple other things. Like, do you have anything else you want to say about this one?
No. I just I think that it's very cool, and I think that it's interesting to see this record as a kind of primordial ooze from which so much really ends up arising.
Yeah. So, from, like, one thing I could have said up front, and, you know, just somehow got away from me, was, one reason you could hear this as more black metal than the demo is that they are much more, is that whether or not they're playing chords or sort of broken up chord, or whether they're creating chords through arpeggios and two guitar interaction. Whether or not they're playing chords, there's a much greater interest in texture than on the last record. And there's a much greater emphasis in sort of the cool effect you can have from just sitting on a note for a minute, for, you know, a couple bars. All the other guitar is always doing something, but there's a greater sort of solidity and vertical layering happening in this sound, rather than the sort of like line-based sharp death metal riffing in Finis Malorum. And you can hear how they are, by 1996, there's a pretty clear idea of what Norwegian black metal is and how black metal and death metal are different. And one of the differences would obviously be black metal is about chording. And you can hear this with Dawn, too. The Swedish bands kind of tend to start out doing more lead and thrash, lead-driven and thrash-patterned stuff, and then move towards a more chorded sound over time. So you can hear them responding to that, and I think especially by '96, Demysteris has been out for a couple of years. Mm-hmm. And they would have had access to versions of those songs since like 90 or 91. But, like, to hear the full thing with its kind of gauzy, distant production, and the big sound, the gothic atmosphere, that must... I mean, Mayhem was clearly the big band for Joan Notfight, and it must have had a big significance also for Sacramentum. So hearing sort of mature Mayhem, or the sort of Nightside Eclipse, Emperor... there's this, they're paying more attention to the idea of texture, and of texture as being something fundamental for atmosphere. Mm-hmm. Just greater focus on harmony, and, you know, tones that sound misty, like the mist in the back of this, you know, Necrolord painting.
Yeah, it would be a while before some of these aesthetic markers really took hold elsewhere.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, that is one move towards black metal, even though in many other ways this is a much more sort of considered and carefully paced work. Other than that, I kind of just want to close this with a bit of a rant. One reason people have been paying more attention to Sacramentum over the last few years, aside from the fact that their approach to songwriting is really now what people are looking for in black metal, is that they started touring quite energetically a couple of years ago. And I'm lucky I got to see them in Chicago a couple of years ago now. It would have been late 2023. And it was, you know, they were just phenomenal live band, tight and energetic, and the songs live there was no sort of like, usually when you hear black metal songs live, they sound like kind of pixelated, low-res versions of the recordings, especially when it's something that this complicated. There was really none of that, right? There was this, you get this sort of warm but clearly demarcated tones all carried over really well. And Nisse did a phenomenal job as a frontman, and that's something I want to talk about real quick with respect to his legacy. Something I heard from a number of people after that tour, including from people I respect, was they were sort of giving him shit for doing hand gestures. And for, being up front, shirt off, drenching himself with a blood chalice, and doing sort of like occult magical gestures.
Yeah. Like a black metal band should.
Indeed. Yes, this is I understand that American bands have always set themselves apart by being a bit less theatrical, but really, and it's one thing to have your own style and say, okay, we're Americans, we don't wear corpse paint or whatever you like, but this kind of butthurt attitude about European theatrics, it's not a metal attitude. That's an American hardcore attitude from the 80s, when they had to cope with the fact that Black Flag was getting mercilessly cucked by Discharge. And Discharge had much better hair.
And Henry Rollins, claiming that he thought Venom was funny and totally not cool, and he didn't feel jealous,
Exactly. Yes, it's the Sonic Youth Venom parody recording where they're all attempting to mock Venom for just trying to do something larger than life.
Yeah.
And committing themselves and putting themselves out there and exposing themselves to the mockery of small spirits who don't realize that their lack of pretense is its own mask. And that's what's really pretentious, right? It's, I'm just an everyday guy, which makes me safe from doing anything or trying anything.
That's what I want to see on stage, an everyday guy.
Yeah, just a guy in a white t-shirt with some jeans, man. Just like me, man. Just a down-to-earth guy. So, Sacramentum are not down-to-earth guys. Nisse Karlén, not a down-to-earth guy. This guy fucking meant it. And he put himself out there in a stage show that didn't even involve, darkness. The lighting for Sacramentum was pretty bright. You could see everything that was happening. There was no fog machine. There was no weird black light shit. He just stood out on stage and went absolutely nuts, doing as a dark sorcerer should. And it was majestic, and it, reinforced my faith in heavy metal. And we salute him.